Hi, and welcome to the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, Emergency Medical Services webinar. Tonight, we're talking about the future of EMS, specifically how the military is a part of EMS. My name is Dr. Brian Everett. I'll be moderating tonight's session. And we are going to get started here in just a sec. Please, tonight's program is being recorded and will be uploaded to the AAEM EMS section website within 24 hours. So please feel free to check that out at your next earliest convenience. If you're in the audience, please feel free to say hello. Tell us where you're from in the chat, and we'd love to greet you. These sessions are meant to be interactive, which is why we chose tonight to be a Zoom meeting. You're welcome to come on the chat, ask a question. We'll call on you and then have you share your screen so you can see our panelists and interact with them. It's now my privilege to introduce our panelists tonight. First up is Lieutenant Commander Brian Ferguson. He's with the U.S. Navy. He started his medical career as a Navy hospital corpsman at Walter Reed Medical Center in the general surgery floor. Then after 2 years, he was transferred to Camp Lejeune Medical Center. It was at Camp Lejeune that he became certified as the EMTB and started running EMS in Jacksonville, North Carolina. After transitioning out of the U.S. Navy, he joined a volunteer fire department in Maryland where he ran fire and EMS calls. He completed his training as a firefighter, hazmat ops, rescue technician, and became an EMT paramedic and rescue diver. Shortly after finishing paramedic training, he was hired full-time with the county. As a paramedic, he was a training officer in charge of quality assurance for the county and worked closely with the medical director doing QA, which was one of the reasons why he decided to go back to the medical school. He worked full-time as a paramedic while finishing his undergraduate degree and a master's of science. He went back to the Navy in 2008 and was deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Spent 2 years on the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier CVN-71, the Theodore Roosevelt. He went to medical school at the under the Health Promotions Scholarship Program at Virginia Tech and completed an emergency medicine residency in 2001. He started the EMS and Disaster Fellowship after residency and is now finishing his second year with the University of Texas San Antonio Uniform Service Health Education Consortium. So welcome, Brian. Thank you for being part of it. Captain Shannon Thompson was born in Wiesbaden, Germany, and continued to live the life of a military child, being raised in many locations. She graduated high school in Alabama, and she attended the University of Alabama at Birmingham, earning a bachelor's degree in science, specifically in chemistry. Subsequently, she taught high school and really saw combat. Then junior high school science for 4 years, consequently earning a master's of arts of education. During her time as a teacher, she joined her local volunteer fire department in rural Alabama, becoming a national registered EMTB. She worked for a locally owned private ambulance company and has been on active duty with the U.S. Air Force since matriculating into medical school at the Uniformed Service University where she completed her residency in the emergency medicine at Brooke Army Medical Center. She's currently board certified by the American Board of Emergency Medicine as in both emergency medicine and EMS after completing her EMS Disaster Medicine Fellowship at San Antonio. During her fellowship, she completed her master's in public health at the University of South Florida. She's currently the EMS medical director for Joint Base San Antonio, Fire and Emergency Services, and Joint Base San Antonio Laughlin EMS. Her EMS interests include education and training, in addition to flight events and tactical medicine. Outside of work, she enjoys spending time outside, particularly hiking, paddleboarding, or running, and she enjoys playing board games. Next up, we have Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Harper. He was born in Plano, Texas, and attended the University of Texas at Dallas for undergraduate. After graduating, he decided to apply for medical school on the Army's dime and attended the Uniformed Service University at Bethesda, Maryland. In medical school, he received the Society of Medical Consultants to the Armed Forces Award. And wanting to get back to Texas as soon as possible, he decided to attend residency at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. After residency, his first assignment was as brigadier surgeon at the 107th Infantry Combat Brigade team out of Bonhalden, Germany, where he was responsible for over 200 combat medics and 600 physician assistants, providing care for over 4,000 soldiers assigned to the brigade. From 2011 to 2012, the brigade deployed to the regional combat north in Afghanistan, participating with Afghan forces to provide security and counterinsurgency operations in the area. In addition, he served several battalions assigned to the duty elsewhere and was responsible for resulting in medical operations pictures that span the entire country. He was then assigned to William Beaumont Army Medical Center in El Paso, where he was a staff physician and medical director for fire EMS at Fort Bliss. He then returned to San Antonio, where he completed a 2-year fellowship in military EMS and disaster medicine, along with a master's in public health. After completing fellowship, he was the chair director of the Department Combat Medical Training for Fort Sam Houston, which was one of the largest pre-hospital training programs in the country, graduating over 6,000 students a year and supplying combat commanders with soldiers that are proficient in the latest advancements in TCCC. After leaving active duty in 2019, continued to serve at Brooke Army Medical Center as a contractor in the emergency department and worked part-time in the University of Texas Health San Antonio with the Department of Emergency Medicine at University Hospital. He decided to stay in the U.S. Army Reserve and deployed to Kuwait from 2020 to 2021 as Deputy Commander of Clinical Services at the U.S. Military Hospital Kuwait. He has been full-time with the Office of the Medical Director since September 2001, and his military awards included a Bronze Star Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and Army Commendation Medal with 3 Oak Leaves. Finally, I'd like to introduce Captain Benjamin Walrath. He completed his Bachelor of Arts in Biology at Rice University and became a commissioned officer in the United States Navy in June 1995. He attended the Surface Warfare Officer School in Newport, Rhode Island, en route to his assignment as an auxiliaries officer aboard U.S. Coronado with the Combat Third Fleet flagship home port out of San Diego. He then served as propulsion division officer for 1 year prior to transferring to Ingleside, Texas as operations officer with the MCM rotation crew Echo. After a successful Persian Gulf deployment, including combat operations in support of Operation Desert Fox, he resigned his commission to pursue his medical education. He began his medical training at Rush Medical College in September 2001 and earned his doctorate in medicine in June 2005. He then reported for duty as a member of the Navy Medical Center San Diego Transition Year Intern Class and served as the Transition Year Program President. He was honored with the Transition Year and Emergency Medicine Intern of the Year at graduation. He then attended Aeromedical Officers course in Pensacola, Florida, before assuming the position of flight surgeon for a Helicopter C Combat Squadron 28 and division officer of the Flight Medicine Clinic at Branch Health Clinic, Sewell Point, Norfolk, Virginia, in July 2007. Here is recognition as Commander of Naval Aviation Atlantic Fleet Surgeon of the Year in 2008 and began his residency training in emergency medicine in July of 2009, serving as academic chief resident from July 2011 to July 2012. Upon completion of residency, he reported to the U.S. Navy Hospital, Okinawa, Japan, as emergency medicine department staff physician and EMS medical director. He also served as head of EMS department from August 2013 until his departure in May 2014 for fellowship training at the San Antonio, Texas. During his fellowship, he earned a master's in public health degree, concentration on leadership studies at the University of Texas Health Science Center School of Public Health. He returned to San Diego, assumed the responsibility as director of Naval Medical Force Pacific EMS, and shortly thereafter also became medical director of a large search and rescue program. He deployed as team leader to damage control surgery team 3, conducting medical support operations for Joint Special Operations Command in ARFCOM from July 2017 to April 2018. At the beginning of COVID pandemic, he was named the Deputy Director of Hospital Incident Command System and assumed additional responsibility as department head and academic chair of the EMS at Naval Medicine Readiness and Training Center, San Diego, from April 2020 to June 2022. Continues to serve as Director of EMS for NMFP and Medical Director for ComSwag PAC Search and Rescue. He recently returned to the Pacific Partnership 22, a global health engagement mission, FridayCom. He's supported by his wife and 3 sons. Guys, thank you guys so much for participating tonight. I know I got through that with all the military acronyms that I could get through. But thank y'all for being patient with me getting through that. So let's start off with a couple of questions we have concerning how the military plays a role in EMS. And really, I want to start with how it began. So can you guys give us a little bit, especially Dr. Parker, can you give us a little bit of history about what EMS's role with the military?
Yes. Thank you, Brian. I would love to. First off, let me just say that I never want you to navigate me anywhere around Germany ever. We will be so lost. Not even close, but good try.
Thanks.
Wiesbaden and Baumholder.
Yeah, no.
What they're called. All right, let me try to share this screen real quick. All right, you all should be seeing my screen. Let me know if you aren't. Or let me know if you are.
Got it.
All right, great. So, military EMS, I just wanted to set the stage just real quickly, how long the military has really been doing pre-hospital care and emergency medical services, using ancillary providers to extend the care that physicians provide to their patients. So first off, civilian EMS really traces its roots back to like around 1966 with the white paper, right? Everybody kind of knows that the NHTSA white paper that kind of like put EMS kind of at the forefront. So that's where we really trace it back to. But if you were to look at the military, where I would trace that back to is 1775. So 247 years compared to 56 years. So we've been doing this for a while. In fact, it started, I say in 1775, with what's called a surgeon's mate. So as soon as they formed the Continental Army, they got authorization for 2 surgeons for that small little contingent initially. And each of those surgeons were able to select a few surgeons' mates that they were able to bring in, that were able to extend their care. Continued on throughout the 1800s until they came up with this hospital steward program. There's actually an image of a hospital steward in here. I don't know if this is an actual image from the Civil War. I think I saw like a Casio wristwatch on one of these people, so they might be reenacting. But whatever it is, they did have these hospital stewards. They weren't their own MOS though, and they actually were a pretty prestigious rank because it was equal to a first sergeant. So if you wanted to promote, this was a really good thing for our enlisted members to do. And again, the point of them was to extend the care of the physician beyond just their local reach, just in the hospital, just in with their, the patients that they were seeing. It still wasn't completely pre-hospital though. I mean, these were still people that were with the physician doing care under their direction, but they weren't necessarily pre-hospital until we got really to the Civil War. And Major Jonathan Letterman was at the right place, the right time. Basically in the Civil War, it was taking days to evacuate wounded off of the battlefield. He got promoted to basically be the head of the Army Medical Department, or whatever it was called back then. And they said, the generals turned to him and said, hey, you need to fix this. What do you want to do? He took some lessons from the flying ambulances of Napoleon's surgeon, Leray, and said, well, let's get some ambulances out there and evacuate casualties off the battlefield. So that was during the Civil War. In 1887, General Order 29 created the first full-time enlisted medical corps. So prior to that, the hospital stewards were just people that were infantrymen or field artillery that wanted to promote. But General Order 29, 1887 was the first time that you actually had full-time enlisted medical corps people that were under the guidance of the surgeon. And then the combat medic of today, the modern combat medic, really traces its roots back to World War I. There were actually two flavors of this. This is where they determined that, it wasn't just enough to evacuate people off the battlefield. What care could we be providing to them while they were en route back to the hospital or even at the point of injury? So this was the first time that that medical corps, that enlisted medical corps, really formed up the American Ambulance Service and started treating patients in the field of battle, giving morphine, giving sulfa drugs, things like that for open fractures and wounds, and bandaging, all those things that they're typically doing. They were still under the direction of the physician at this time, of course, and they were taking all of their training and all their guidance from the physicians, and they were still responsible for making sure that these enlisted people were practicing medicine according to what they would want them to do. So really, I would trace the enlisted pre-hospital care specialist all the way back to those surgeons' mates in 1775. That's where they get their roots. But really, the modern combat medic that's treating people far forward, we can really trace back to World War I, which is still well before 1966, where the civilian world was doing it. Come today, and the combat medic has gone through significant iterations in the United States Army. Of course, you have the hospital corpsmen in the Navy that have done the same thing, and the Air Force med techs that have gone through a lot of changes. In the early 2000s, there was a real push to have all of our combat medics become, at least in the Army, EMT certified through the National Registry, as that had become a national standard. And we've kept that tradition up until today. We're still getting our NREMT through the combat medic training program. Some of the other services do and don't do that to varying degrees. But that's kind of where we came from and where we're at today. I think the important thing that I want to remember is that, there's always been a physician, even in these line units that had medical providers attached to them. There's always been a physician in charge of them. But the enlisted people are still owned by the commander. And what that means is that the commander, and I don't mean the command surgeon, I mean the commander, the infantryman, the skipper on a boat, the Air Force squadron commander. Those people are still very responsible and very involved in what their medics are doing. But they are supervised and practicing under the licensure of that command surgeon. The command surgeon is supposed to educate, assist, and get them to a place where they are really their physician extenders. Here's a couple of quotes from some books that I read when I was doing my thesis that I just thought were really great. I can't read them because, oh, no, I can read them. I can just move my little face down to the end. I thought that these were great. These are all both from World War I, from medical information from there, given the training in nursing and field work by the medical officers and enabled the medical officers to organize and conduct their hospitals. That was specifically about the hospital corps. And then the second one from 1917, all men of the hospital corps will be instructed under the supervision of the surgeon of the post in the duties of litter bearers and the methods of rendering first aid to the sick and the wounded. To this day, the Army doctrine has continued to recognize that relationship of the EMS physician to their pre-hospital care providers in multiple publications, at least in the Army ones that I've published here. But I'm sure that the Navy and the Air Force have similar things. So again, I just wanted to set the stage. Civilian EMS, 1966, United States Army, 1775. We've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, that's impressive. So I guess my next question is, since it's been 247 years, how has it evolved to today, and how is it changing today to support the medical mission of the U.S. military as that medical mission changes?
I think it's interesting. It does change, and it changes not as rapidly as we would like. The military is obviously steeped in tradition and unencumbered by progress in some aspects, for sure. So if I were to kind of sum up or answer your question in kind of a real quick way, it would be that the military is still pushing the boundaries as far as what the pre-hospital care provider can do. Because at the end of the day, at least a lot of services will have people operating far forward with extended supply lines, no real good communications, and have to have really a system that the physician is maybe remote, but he has these people practicing medicine for him in places that you wouldn't otherwise have. For instance, in Afghanistan, you kind of alluded to it. I had medics working at, I think my highest count was 30 separate bases. I had 7 physician assistants and 6 doctors, but I had combat medics working at 30 bases. So they had to be rendering all of the care and all the primary care, all the emergency care, everything to their cadre of soldiers that they were tied to. And it was really hard for me to get them to a place where they were trained up. And even more importantly than that, it was hard for me to get the commanders initially to realize that, hey, that's important. Fortunately, if you're able to get buy-in from your top commander, in my case, my brigade commander, to really train up those medics, to get them rotations in the ER, he'd let them supervise me and come to the ER with me at launch stool, things like that. That really helped. So getting your medics to actually practice beyond their scope in many cases, or what they'd be allowed to do in the civilian world, I think is where we're headed to more and more and every day. And it's a constant struggle, but it's something that we're really working on and focusing on at the tactical level, with the individual relationship between a medic and a provider.
Does anyone else struggle with training our pre-hospital providers as EMS physicians? Is that something across the board, or is that a unique situation of wartime?
No, I think training I think trying to match pre-hospital clinician training with their expected scope of practice in the field is a critical challenge for us as medical directors. And I think for the military in particular, the environments in which we're expecting to operate Again, the sometimes incredibly austere environments with limited support, and then the tyranny of distance as far as transport is required. And when you're talking about operating in AFRICOM or in PACOM, so Pacific, Africa, different places where the distance from point of injury to maybe that next level receiving facility, it's like if I'm currently stationed in San Diego, and if a patient got, if there was a car accident on Interstate 5 here in San Diego, and the nearest trauma center was in New York City, that's the EMS challenge that we're dealing with in the military, because that's what it's like to try to transport a patient from maybe the austere operating, the location of the military operation in Africa, and the next level of care where that surgeon might be. So obviously training a pre-hospital provider, giving them the skill set to keep a patient, to stabilize them, prepare them for transport, and then and it's not just keep them alive, it's start the resuscitation. So when they do get to the surgeon, they're optimally resuscitated, so, and ready to go under the knife to then, save their lives. And I think what we see a lot in the military is, right now we pat ourselves in the back, we break our arms patting ourselves in the back with a 98% survival rate if you get to the Role 2 facilities. If you get to the surgeon's knife, 98% survivability, which is fantastic. But that ignores everyone that's dying in the pre-hospital setting that never gets to the surgeon. And that's really where we as EMS physicians, that's where we earn our bread and butter, is how do we save those patients and get them to the surgeon? The problem is, at least in my humble opinion, or maybe not so humble opinion, is in the military, like Steven said, there's a lot of customs and courtesies, and there's a lot of honors and traditions, but that's one of our greatest strengths and also our greatest weakness, because with that comes a lot of pride, a lot of ego, and those command surgeons, they're not required to be EMS physicians, yet a major part of their responsibility is running complex patient movement systems. And so then they have no understanding of how to run a complex patient movement system. But to be a command surgeon is a career enhancing position. Then in that role as the command surgeon, they don't want to admit to the fact that they don't know how to run a complex patient movement system. And historically, they didn't, before EMS physicians existed, they did an adequate job. In 1966, when civilians took over EMS, it took about 45 years for the civilian medical community to recognize that EMS has a body of knowledge that warranted its own subspecialty certification. And so the American Board of Medical Specialties said in 2012, EMS is going to be its own specialty. 2013, there was a board, the first board certification exam. So now it's been a decade of EMS physicians as a specialty, but in that same time period, it's a zero-sum game for the military. The military is not growing. And so if we're going to add EMS physicians to the cadre, some other type of physician needs to go away, because again, it's a zero-sum game. So for years, we've had pediatricians, internists, family practice doc, surgeons running complex patient movement systems because EMS physicians didn't exist. Well, now that EMS physicians exist, we have to find our place, and who are we going to replace in that overall manpower pool or staffing pool to have the right knowledge and expertise running these complex patient movement systems. And I think once we can solve that very difficult problem, then you'll see military pre-hospital medicine start catching up with the civilian community. But for right now, you don't have thought leaders in the right positions in the military to rapidly affect change. And so what happens is the EMS leaders in the military have to run their ideas through bureaucrats, for lack of a better term, and it gets bogged down by the bureaucracy. And so military EMS has been very slow to develop in the last 30 years.
Yeah, I wanted to tag on to stuff that Ben just said about like the military EMS physician and how it's been hard to get that recognized. I mean, he's right. It's a zero-sum game. So if you're going to add specifically EMS trained physicians, You have to get rid of other physicians. The other thing is, in the military, there's no at least in the Army, there's no difference between me as an EMS physician and me as an emergency medicine physician. They don't have a separate military occupational specialty code for an EMS physician. All of us are 62 alphas, which is just an ER doc. But what we do need to do is we need to provide training. I think because it is a zero-sum game, we need to provide more training to our specialists that are going out and becoming really de facto EMS physicians, whether that's ER doctors, family practice doctors, internal medicines, or even the pediatrician. I literally just got an email last week from a starving flight paramedic out in Hawaii who came across my thesis from my master's degree, which was about medical direction in the United States Army. And he's like, yeah, how do I get buy-in from my battalion surgeon? Because I'm a critical care flight paramedic and my battalion surgeon's supposed to be supervising me. Essentially, that battalion surgeon is the medical director for that Charlie company, medical evacuation company that has a whole bunch of critical care flight paramedics. And I'm like, well, how much interaction do you guys have? And he's like, never met the guy, never seen him. And so I'm sure that that's somebody straight out of residency, maybe not even residency, maybe did an internship or nothing else. And nobody ever told him, hey, an important part of your job is supervising these people. And I think that's one thing that we as a specialty need to do a better job is wrapping our arms around our other specialties that are going out and going to be doing the job and trying to educate them.
That's a great example, Stephen. And we have the same problem in the Navy with our SAR MedTech community, who are our equivalent, I guess, or pseudo equivalent to the critical care flight paramedics. Unfortunately, the Navy still also we don't embrace National Registry paramedic or critical care paramedic certification. We're working in that direction, but we're again still a decade behind our Army colleagues there, but or more, several decades potentially. But we have our flight surgeons who are their medical directors, and our flight surgeons, they finish internship, you go to flight school, just like you heard in my bio. That's what I did. So I showed up to my squadron and I had SAR MedTechs who were working for me. And the reality of it is their clinical skill set and clinical experience was greater than mine. I was the physician in theory overseeing them, but there were no standardized protocols. So I was expected to come up with my own protocols and then train my medics my SAR medics to those protocols, and then expect them to go practice. Well, the reality of it is most physicians with just an internship and training that go out to the fleet aren't comfortable with advanced skills and resuscitative techniques and aren't current on the literature because they just survived internship. So your main focus is on the preventive health of your squadron, and that's a big part of your job. You don't have the critical care experience and expertise to then go and teach medics or supervise medics who are expected to provide that critical care medicine in the field. And so I mean, to me, it's just you're asking too much of someone who they're going to finish their flight surgery tour, their operational medicine tour, go back as a resident, and as a first-year resident, if a code happens in the hospital and the only physician to show up was that just returned GMO, let's be honest, the nurse is running the code. That doctor is going to be clueless and overwhelmed. There are very few physicians that would feel comfortable in that situation. And I say that, but not just from an anecdotal experience, but we actually published a paper on flight surgeon confidence to be medical directors and to function in an in-route care provider role. And most flight surgeons are not comfortable in that role. And I don't blame you, they're not trained to be. So we can absolutely do better, because the reality of it is we can't have EMS physicians in all of those. It would be great. The ideal system would have a board certified EMS physician running all of those patient movement systems, wherever they are. And while that would be ideal, that's not realistic. And so we've written the JTS clinical practice guideline. Actually, I think, Stephen, you wrote that section on medical directors, and it was identifying regional medical directors who had EMS board certification, and they were then be supervising the local medical directors at the unit medical directors to provide them some senior guidance, but some sort of a course as well, like the NAEMSP medical practicum course for medical directors, but geared towards the military, similar to what we teach, the one-day course we teach at SOMA, would be optimal for all of the unit surgeons out there.
So I would say that maybe the Air Force, we're the youngest service, but we might be leading the way on EMS medical directorship. We do have our own EMS consultant who works with our EM consultants. So for those of you who are not familiar with the consultants are the consultant to the Surgeon General, who's basically in charge of our medical operations and placement of people, and they provide advice. So we have our own separate EMS consultant who has strategically placed the EMS trained physicians throughout the Air Force, including at the larger installations, for example, JBSA here in San Antonio, as well as some of our larger EMS operations. While Eglin's not a big base, it certainly has a lot of pre-hospital medicine happening there, as well as Alaska, where we have EMS trained physicians strategically located in some of these areas. So I would say that they're starting to recognize, at least in the Air Force, our unique skill set, and starting to pay attention to that. My position was actually created and awarded FTEs to actually supervise our medics, and it was split off from what was a joint position, as it is at most bases, where we now actually have a separate EMS medical director and the emergency department medical director are two separate people, myself being the EMS medical director. So I'd say that at least in the Air Force, we are making strides towards recognizing EMSs especially.
How does the communication between the branches when it comes to developing these EMS systems, even though you have different missions, is there any kind of communication? Is there any kind of best practice sharing that goes on there?
So recently the Army and the Air Force published joint protocols together. So the Army and the Air Force have rejoined each other. As many of you probably know, the Air Force came out of the Army and have decided to use one set of protocols. So essentially, just like state-run EMS systems that have protocols that overarch the state, we have one set of protocols that overarch all of the Air Force and all of the Army. We haven't joined forces with our Navy colleagues as of yet, but maybe there's some way in the future for that.
And Brian, coming from previous time as a regular person in the military, I don't want to misspeak, was enlisted or officer, whatever.
I was enlisted. I was
Enlisted. Okay, enlisted. So enlisted person in the military. You've kind of seen the transition as time has gone on as a corpsman and moving through. What do you see as kind of some of the successes of the EMS physicians have had in the development of the EMS systems and these patient care movements and treatments pre-hospital? And what are some of the biggest challenges you see coming on the horizon?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I was when I was a hospital corpsman, I ran EMS at Camp Lejeune. That was my job. So since then, that is now a Fed fire mission. We don't have corpsmen doing that job anymore. We still have corpsmen providing EMS care overseas, but not in CONUS. And honestly, I don't know who my medical director was then. I have no idea. Remember working with senior medic, a nurse. I don't remember a medical director at all during that time period. And Captain Walrath, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe 10 years ago, we actually had an EMS specialty leader, EMS and disaster medicine specialty leader, and we have since lost that. I don't want to say we're going backwards, and I think we're moving in the right direction again, but it's been kind of a back and forth just from my perspective. And like I said, Captain Walrath would have a better understanding of that than I would, because of kind of the way I've gone through.
Yeah, I can from the Navy perspective, we did have a emergency medical services specialty leader, or pre-hospital and disaster medicine specialty leader up until just a few years ago. Unfortunately, our most recent corps chief, not the current, but the one right before him, said basically in order to have he tried to trim down the number of specialty leaders. And if there weren't 10 physicians in the specialty, then that specialty got folded into the kind of the parent specialty. So for EMS, we only had at the time, I guess, 5 EMS physicians, and if you just counting board certified EMS physicians. So as a specialty, we were then folded under emergency medicine, which honestly was okay because the assistant specialty leader for emergency medicine was an EMS physician. So that worked out okay. But kind of like Steven said earlier, and actually I briefed my regional chief of staff early today, you can't, when you have emergency, when EMS falls under emergency medicine or under another specialty, well, when there's competing priorities between emergency medicine and EMS, then the parent specialty is always going to win that battle before it ever gets out of the office. And that's what's happening in the Navy to EMS. We have some great advocates for EMS, but the problems within the emergency medicine community are overwhelming the problems within the EMS community. And if you look at the NDA 17 that highlighted critical wartime specialties, emergency medicine and pre-hospital and EMS were 2 of the 5 specialties. They're separated out in that legislation as discrete and distinct separate entities. So it's disappointing from a Navy perspective that we've combined them, because in reality, they should be separate. They have separate objectives, sometimes competing objectives. Not every emergency medicine physician is an EMS physician. And the reality of it is not all EMS physicians need to be emergency medicine physicians. And I think if we were able to separate ourselves out and make ourselves open to family practice and, internal medicine and other specialties like the American Board of Medical Specialties, like AAEM has the subspecialty is designated, then I think it might be a more attractive specialty. And we would have greater numbers, as an opportunity to join the pre-hospital ranks.
It does seem like we have a lot of the similar difficulties between civilian and military with trying to get the recognition and time and piece of the pie so much to practice emergency EMS medicine outside of emergency medicine. We're sometimes so tied together, it's very difficult for us to separate ourselves. Y'all touched upon this a little bit here and there. My understanding is the U.S. military, and correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of transitioning from a kind of movement to more of a prolonged field care tactical standpoint. How is that affecting y'all in your planning and development of training and protocols and meeting that mission and standard for that long-term care moving forward?
It's for the Army, it's everything right now, Brian. Specifically for our operational medicine people, so our combat medics, our 68 whiskeys, these are enlisted medics. They come in 18-year-old kids straight off the street, high school education, maybe college, maybe not. They come here to Fort Sam. So they go to basic, they come here to Fort Sam, and they get their 68 whiskey and they get their NREMT. It's a 16-week training program initially. I used to be the director of it, and every time I had 2 surgeons general come by and I had a couple of sergeants major, and every time they came by, they said, "Okay, what do you need?" And I said, "Well, this was back in like 2016. If you're going to give me anything, I need more time. I need more than 16 weeks." What they do is they do about 7 weeks of NREMT. Then they do another 7 weeks or so of tactical combat casualty care and really advanced skills, IV, crike, things like that. And then we had a 2-week field training exercise. And if you wanted me to do prolonged field care type stuff and get them to a place where they could do that, I needed more time and I needed hospital rotations. Well, we're never going to get a hospital rotation for our initial entry training. And the reason for that is I put through just myself 6,000 students a year. I don't know if anybody knows how many EMTs graduate across the United States, but it's 60,000. So I graduated 6,000 of those 60,000. So 10% of all of the EMTs graduating every year come from the United States Army, which isn't impressive if there's 10 schools, right? Everybody should be 10%. I don't know how many EMT schools there are in the US. I know that there's 49 in Texas. And our school was doing 10%. So we just couldn't get the clinical rotations and actually see the patients, but we could get more time. So recently they've done this thing where they're giving them an extra 2 weeks of prolonged field care. They're not getting to actually see any real live patients during that time, but they are getting some. But what we've determined is that these medics, if they're really going to learn prolonged care, it can't be during their initial entry training where they're just getting like stuff shoved into their mouth with a fire hose. It really has to be almost a mentorship type thing where after they go out to their first duty assignment, somebody who's more experienced grabs them and brings them along and teaches them through like the sick call, ADTMC, stuff like that, basically working every day to take care of patients. Well, what's the problem with that? You don't have any of those experienced people that have ever had that training, because all those combat medics, they went out and they did the 16-week, and then they went out and they never had to use it ever again. And then they became NCOs. And now you expect your NCOs to be the highest clinical quality acumen people out there, but they haven't touched a patient in 3 or 4 years. So that's really our biggest problem, is the follow-on assignments after they do their initial training, what type of mentorship they're getting. And these people are going to about 150 different potential duty assignments. That some of them are going to go be combat medics in an infantry brigade. Some of them are going to go to a hospital. Some of them are going to go to like a clinic. Some of them are going to go and do like USAR stuff. Or, I mean, they're just going to be all over the place. And there's not really any consistency with their follow-on assignment or what type of training they're going to get. And that's probably the hardest part, because they rapidly lose their skills. And so if they're rapidly losing their trauma skills after graduating, and we've kind of proven that, because 6 months after they're like, I don't know how to start an IV anymore. How can you keep their prolonged field care skills when they're not seeing patients? That's our biggest challenge right now.
So if I was going to transition from the civilian, lose about 20 pounds and move into the military as an EMS position, how's my training different from in the fellowship role from the civilian to the military, and how are they similar?
Are you asking if you were not an EMS physician yet?
Yeah. So if I'm
So what's the
ready
difference
to-
between the military EMS fellowship versus civilian fellowships?
Yes, yeah.
So I think for me, and again, I did the fellowship with Stephen 2014, 2016. So it may have changed a little bit since then, but probably the biggest difference is the second year. So most civilian EMS fellowships are 1 year. And honestly, I think part of the reason is financially motivated. You, as a fellow, you typically get paid as a 4th year resident or a 3rd year resident, which is much less than a staff position. So you, as a civilian, I want to get out of fellowship and get into being get into the occupational class of staff position as quickly as possible. In the military, you get paid based on your rank, and you can earn different bonuses for different specialties. But ultimately, whether you're a fellow, a resident, or a board certified physician, it doesn't matter, because I mean, it does in the sense of which bonus you're eligible for, but your pay is is relatively similar. So adding that second year of fellowship allows us in the military specific fellowship, your first year, you work with San Antonio Fire Department, and it's an amazing opportunity, amazing experience, great education. And you come out with a really well-rounded, fantastic civilian EMS education. And you could go be a civilian EMS medical director and do a great job coming out of that fellowship. You're working side to side with the civilian EMS fellows from University Hospital. So you have that program, you're working together. But it's the second year where, if you do it right, you really can take that second year of your fellowship and really tailor your education to a military specific, the military specific problem sets, and really come to understand all the different Department of Defense instructions and procedural instructions and standard operating procedures. There's a lot of things, and a lot of, again, you can really try to learn the bureaucracy, which will help you navigate that bureaucracy and hopefully become a more effective EMS physician. So that's really the second year of the fellowship where, really, in my mind, that's where the difference lies, is that if you take advantage of that second year, you can really learn what it is to be a military EMS physician and kind of try to solve some of the problems that we've been talking about. And as a fellow, you have the time. Once you graduate fellowship, well, then you have a job. Now your job is no longer just learn to be an EMS physician. Now your job is go do something else. So I think, and so then you're trying to solve all the problems in addition to your primary job. Maybe Brian or someone in the fellowship now is a different answer, but.
I would 100% agree. I think it does come down to some opportunities, but you can there's a ton of military EMS opportunities down in San Antonio. So being in that spot in particular, especially with the Air Force and Army, you can take advantage of a lot of different things. And then I've been able to take advantage of helping out with the regional EMS for the Navy as part of my second year. So I agree with you. The second year really, as far as learning military EMS, really makes a big difference.
Yeah, the second year is key. Just a real quick story about Dr. Walrath in the second year. He gave a little talk to DHA about basically the studies with Cotwall showing the Rangers had really great survival rates when they implemented TCCC as a command directed program. And then the DHA came back to Dr. Walrath and said, hey, you're mixing up some verbiage and your trauma lexicon is off and you're misrepresenting some data. And Dr. Walrath got so pissed off that he's like, all right, you know what? We're settling this trauma lexicon thing right now. And during his second year of fellowship, he put together a working group that had people like John Holcomb, Frank Butler, Brian Eastridge, Robert Mabry, brought in everybody that was anybody in military EMS and had them sitting in a room discussing, all right, guys, what are we going to say is the appropriate thing to call a potentially survivable injury, et cetera, which was pretty amazing. I can't imagine anybody doing that in a civilian fellowship, being able to bring in the thought leaders from across the country for like a 2-day thing where you really just hammer out, where the specialty is going and a lot of research and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, listening to y'all, it sounds like we got a lot of challenges coming forward with with EMS physicians in the military, very similar to those in the civilian world. Just building the subspecialty, recognizing in the House of Medicine and being a part of improving care as thought leaders in this area. Any last questions from our participants today? I want to make sure you guys get a chance to ask a question. We've had an incredible discussion, some very frank discussion and very informative from our panelists today. So I'm going to open it up. If you just want to hop on and ask a question, go ahead, or just put it in the chat real quick. Otherwise, we'll kind of close out here in just a moment. All right. Well, guys, thank y'all so much.
I thought I might ask something if you guys can hear me.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? Roger Stone, Montgomery County Fire Rescue and MIMS Region 5. So I might be a neighbor of is it Dr. Harper that might be a neighbor if it's Walter Reed?
No, sir, I was, it's Ferguson. I was actually, I worked at Walter Reed and I was a prior Maryland firefighter paramedic. So,
Oh, where did you volunteer?
so I was a volunteer in Easton on the Eastern Shore, but I was a
Gotcha.
career firefighter paramedic for Queen Anne's County.
Gotcha. No. Yeah, Easton, famous volunteer department. I actually had privilege at the hospital through 2014. So the question I had is, in 2018, one of the surgeons at Walter Reed, who is one of the medical directors for the Naval District, Washington, I think on the surgical side, on the trauma service, had a symposium about military and civilian partnerships in trauma care, given the coming to a close of the wartime casualties in Afghanistan. I think that they were looking for all different sorts of partnerships in the military. And I think one of the doctrines that was being discussed was during peacetime, when the civilian surgeons are not operating on casualties as frequently, there might be some benefit to having them develop collaborations where they work on civilians by maybe joining medical staffs in the civilian trauma centers nearby, and also maybe making the local military level, 1, 2, or 3 trauma centers receive patients on base from the local communities. Is that something that's still, a concept or an area of discussion elsewhere around the country at the various military academic centers? That was my first question.
So
Are military surgeons operating in the civilian space, and are trauma centers that are military, like within where they're located, part of the 911 receiving centers for the civilian EMS?
So I'm the most recent graduate, I think, from San Antonio Military Medical Center, or Book Army Medical Center, as it's now called again. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest collaborations, as it's the level 1 trauma center in the DoD. So essentially, we do receive civilian trauma, and we are very much incorporated within the trauma system of San Antonio. So we have the Southwest Regional Advisory Committee, STRAC, that kind of coordinates a lot of the trauma motions within the state of Texas, or in the state of the region within the state of Texas. And more and more, there are military members that are being involved in the civilian community in that manner, to not only support the community, but also to support the readiness mission of trauma care in the military. So I'd say that at least here in San Antonio, that is one major collaboration, including the fellowship that I think all of us graduated from. That is a collaboration with the University of Texas here in, or UT Health, here in San Antonio as well. So I'd say, we're kind of maybe biased because we all spent some time down here, but this is one of the regions where it does work pretty well.
Is the Seattle area or Washington State, the coast, another area where the military trauma center? I believe there is one. Is that Madigan that's in Washington State?
That's correct. Madigan Army Medical Center is it used to be, I'm not sure if it still is, a level 2 trauma center. But all of those residents would also rotate up at civilian hospitals like Harborview and things like that. But what we're currently doing now is specifically taking surgical teams, and many of the services are embedding them into local hospitals. The Army goes down to Miami, Florida, and we're embedded in the trauma system there. I think the Air Force goes up to Cincinnati, And then I was talking to a PA that's a PA from the Navy that's doing an EM fellowship right now, and she's trying to get up to Cook County. So apparently the Navy has got somebody at Cook County that maybe Ferguson or Dr. Walrath knows about better than I do. But what I wanted to say is the hardest thing is those are surgical teams being embedded in, and those are people that are within the medical community of the services. The people that aren't getting embedded in these trauma systems are the people that have gone out to the line units. So the combat medics and the ER doctors that have gone out and been brigade surgeons, or are combat medics in a brigade combat team with like 82nd Airborne Division, they're not getting embedded into these trauma systems. And that's probably the hardest thing, is those are the people that are actually at the tip of the spear. And they aren't getting that sustainment training, but we really want them to.
So yes, I think Madigan, I think somebody in the chat said Madigan is a level 2 trauma center, and receiving center, but the Navy's only trauma center is at Camp Lejeune, and they are it's probably the most recent to be designated, and I believe it's a level 3 at the moment. That's the only one that the Navy has. There is discussion of trying to convert a few other, at least one, if not more, hospitals to trauma centers. But again, unfortunately, the resources required to become a trauma center and meet the appropriate minimum requirements to get designated as a trauma center, it's a huge lift, and something that, again, in this zero-sum game that is military medicine, very difficult to do. So from a Navy perspective, we're looking more to build partnerships necessarily than to convert more military hospitals to trauma centers. So we have a recent partnership that we're developing with UPenn, where we have both individual providers as well as teams going and kind of developing that opportunity. We do have one of our SAR med techs there who's working with their critical care flight paramedic team and their interfacility transfer teams, and having a great experience so far. We also have resuscitative surgical teams, 3 of them going to Cook County, like Dr. Harper said, that those will be coming online here in the next year or two, with them getting staffed, and augmenting that Cook County Hospital with military medical assets, but that also for us gets the sets and reps to maintain our skills currency, and to work with our civilian counterparts, kind of cutting edge, keep developing those relationships. We have our corpsmen going through there as well to get similarly to get experience, clinical experience, kind of like Stephen said earlier with his combat medics, trying to find those facilities that would be willing to let us see more patients is optimal. Over.
Thank you very much. By the way, I apologize. When it looks like my eyes are askew, I'm actually looking at you where all the people are. So I'd have to look away from the screen to look like I'm looking at you. So sorry about that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I also believe the Sea Stars program is active at Shock Trauma in Baltimore. And I believe that's Air Force Base.
Air Force is shock trauma. They have University of Cincinnati, and then in St. Louis, they had that's where I believe their primary partnership sites are.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate that.
Last call for questions. All right. Guys, thank y'all so much for taking the time out tonight to share your thoughts, share your insights. We look forward to working with you all to improve our subspecialty. We'll continue to do these Future of EMS webinars. Please encourage your friends and coworkers to join. Family might be kind of bored here, but thank y'all again. Have a great night. Be safe out there. And please let us know if you have anything. If you guys wouldn't mind, put your contact information in the chat. So if anyone needs that information, they can get a hold of you. Thank you.
Also, thanks to Kathy Huey, as always, for all the support she gives the section and the former committee for years back. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, she's awesome. Right. We'll be